Welcome to Maniac Movies. Today we're going to do Lars von Trier's The House That Jack Built, updates Wednesdays and Fridays. This time I remember to do it at the beginning. I'm getting better.
Oops, that was maybe a mistake.
What was maybe a mistake?
Me getting in this car with you. You might as well be a serial killer. Sorry, but you do kind of look like one.
Alright, so I did Antichrist, Lars von Trier's other recent horror flick, and I'm doing The House That Jack Built today. So, The House That Jack Built was this, in my opinion, Lars von Trier is a big troll, and I talked about that with Antichrist, that if he's told he shouldn't do something, or if he's told he can't do something, he's going to do it. And The House That Jack Built is a movie about a misogynist from a director who had been heavily criticized for his last few movies, particularly Nymphomaniac and Antichrist, not so much Melancholia, having heavy misogynistic overtones. Now, I think that's extremely unfair. I don't think it's any more fair to make a movie about, to call someone who made a movie about a woman being mistreated a misogynist than it is to call Steven Spielberg a Nazi for making Schindler's List. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. And this movie even has a sequence talking about that. That just because you make something about a subject doesn't mean you condone or enjoy the subject. And Lars von Trier actually seems to have made this movie largely as a response to the 2016 presidential election in the United States, which is weird because he's Danish and he lives in Europe, and as far as I'm aware, he's never even been to America, but he's always been obsessed with American politics. He was furious about George W. Bush's presidency. He made a ton of movies, Dogville and Manderley, and I wrote one that I can't remember the name of, Dear Wendy, maybe? They were all heavily, basically just criticisms of the United States and its foreign policies. Again, never even been to the U.S., but fine, whatever. It's his right to do so, and he generally does make good movies, so I'm not going to complain about it. But yeah, he said that this movie was about the fact that he had come to the conclusion that democracy was dead and life was essentially evil and soulless, and fine, whatever. He still made a good movie. And The House of Jack Built is a really good movie. It's one of the better serial killer movies. While I won't quite say that it's on the level of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or American Psycho, which are generally considered to be about the two best serial killer movies, which is to say a movie about the killer, not a movie about the capture of the killer, which would be like The Silence of the Lambs or Seven. So yeah, I like The House of Jack Built. I think it's a very good movie. It's just a little long, and apparently he originally conceived this as a miniseries, so that might be why this flick is 2.5 hours long. It should have been 2 hours. They should have trimmed a few scenes, and most of the scenes they should have trimmed are it's very obvious when you watch the movie where there could have been cuts made. But essentially this movie is the lead character, Jack, played by Matt Dillon, who is fantastic in the movie, as this button-down OCD dweeb who comes out of his shell when he becomes a psychotic murderer. And he's explaining his life story to an unseen figure initially, and we don't really know the context or why he's doing it, or is he confessing to the police? Is he confessing to just some like what's happening for a lot of the movie? But he's just giving his life story and his personal philosophy to this person he calls Verge. Verge is played by the German actor Bruno Ganz, who has died recently, and I really only knew him from the movie Downfall, where he played Adolf Hitler, and that's actually a pretty solid movie. It's very dark. You don't even have to be interested in World War II to enjoy it, because it's really just a movie about hopeless causes and waiting to die. It's all about Hitler's last days in the bunker before he committed suicide. And there's a lot of Nazism in this movie as well. But so yeah, it's Jack just kind of giving his life story. He claims that he's just going to give these random incidents, and this, like Antichrist, is separated. It's very separated into chapters. And he calls them these incidents, and he claims that they were randomly selected, but it's obvious that these were major milestones in his life. The first one seemingly is the first time he killed someone. The second one would appear to be the first time he made a plan to kill someone, and it goes very poorly. The third time appears to be him eliminating what few ties he has left to normal society. The fourth one is kind of him killing someone that he claims to have genuinely cared for, and the fifth one is his final crime, or his final crime spree would be a better way of putting it. So yeah, so this is basically just Matt Dillon explaining these while these very violent occurrences are happening. And this movie pulls no punches with the violence. It's not over the top violent, but when there is gore, it is extreme and right in your face. There's one scene in which he cuts off a woman's tits that, like, I literally, like, I didn't expect it. And I watch a lot of horror movies. I was not expecting it to be that intense or that graphic, frankly. But yeah, so Matt Dillon's character Jack, basically, he keeps saying that he's an engineer who wishes he was an architect. And what you gather from that as the movie goes on is that he's a guy who lacked creativity, who always wished he was a creative mind. And the only outlet he finds is in murder. He attempted to build his own house, but he failed miserably. So he's this failed struggling architect. He's independently wealthy. Apparently, he claims that he had a large inheritance from his family. And at the beginning of the movie, he's got really bad OCD. He's very meticulous. His hair's always tightly combed, tight, clean shaven. He looks like a dweeb. He's got on the glasses and the suit. And in his first incident, he meets up with Uma Thurman. And you can kind of tell by the trailers that Uma Thurman's not going to be in this very much. She's basically this movie's Drew Barrymore, like Drew Barrymore in Scream. So it was funny that they used her so much in the marketing, but in the marketing you can kind of tell, like, yeah, she's probably in like 10 minutes of this movie. And yeah, she's only in about 10, 15 minutes of this movie. But she's this real bitchy woman who broke down on the side of the road. And basically she just berates him and manipulates him until he just snaps and crushes her face in with a car jack. He's in his creeper van. He does drive a straight up creeper van, but yeah, and it shows her face just smashed in, and it's a good effect. And that's kind of, it shows him, and he kind of gets out of the car and looks at his hands, and there's blood on him, and then he just starts smiling. So to me, that looked like it was his first crime, or his first murder anyway. He goes back to his childhood, and he flashes all the way back to his childhood, and he was obviously always kind of disturbed. He lived on a farm, but it shows him torturing animals as a child. And there's one scene where he has this baby duck that also made me cringe because I know this was shot in Europe, even though it takes place in the U.S. It actually takes place in Washington State because, like, all of Lars von Trier's movies set in the United States take place in Washington State for some reason. He refuses to say why, so I don't know, but it's just kind of a tradition for him at this point. Even Antichrist took place in Washington State, but yeah, that scene made me cringe, and a big part of the reason it did is because I knew this was shot in Europe, and I wasn't sure what animal cruelty laws are in Europe, and it looks real as hell, so I was a little worried they'd actually just cut off a baby duck's leg. But they didn't, and PETA has actually endorsed this movie, saying that its point is accurate, that people who are cruel to animals are often cruel to people as well. That's one of the key signs of a psychopath in a child, that animal cruelty. Also, bedwetting is for some reason. Slow to hit developmental milestones is one. I don't remember them all. I read a book about serial killers, but it's been a long time. So, yeah, Jack is kind of jumping all around in his life, but these incidents appear to be in linear order. The first one, like I said, seems to be his first crime. And you can kind of tell by the way he looks. In the second incident, he's still got a very buttoned down businessman quality to him. And the crime itself is so awkward and so poorly planned. It's almost literally a miracle that he got away with it, up down to the fact that he's saved only because it rains. And that part is pretty gory too. That redheaded woman, she had small parts in The Negotiator, the Samuel L. Jackson hostage movie, where she played the secretary, and in Men in Black, she was the farmer that turns into the alien's wife. But yeah, he kind of weasels his way into her house and does it very poorly. And this woman is clearly just so confused by this idiot's constant babbling that she just kind of lets him in out of curiosity as to what he's getting at. Like, people see him going in, the cops even see him going in. It's astonishing he got away with it. And in the end, he just flat out ties her body to the back of his car and drives away to get away from the cop, and drags her corpse miles down the road, just leaving a bloody smear the whole way. And when you finally see what it did to her body, again, there's not a lot of gore in this movie, but when it's there. It's like half her face has been ripped off by the road. It's like, again, it's another damn moment. But then it starts raining and washes the blood away, because otherwise, obviously, the cop could have just followed the blood trail all the way to this freezer he bought. So, the freezer is kind of his inner sanctum. It's his fortress of solitude. and it's where he brings his bodies, and it's on Prospect Street, I believe. So I'm not sure of the significance of that. I'm sure that means something, but I couldn't. I'm not smart enough, I guess. I don't know. So, and let me just say that as someone who works in an actual cooler, I'm in it all the time. This was not a cooler. This was not a functional cooler. I know that's a petty thing to point out, but when you know something inside and out, you know it. Like his face isn't turning red, his nose isn't running, he's not wearing enough clothing. Um, the few times his breath is shown, it's obviously CG. This thing wasn't cold when they were filming, but just something I noticed. Like in the Hateful Eight, the Quentin Tarantino movie, he actually kept the set at 40 degrees or something because he said actors shouldn't have to pretend to be cold. I'll just make it cold on set. But I guess they didn't want to be uncomfortable. So whatever. But yeah, that was not a functional cooler. So he starts dumping all his bodies in this cooler, all his victims in this cooler, and like there's this whole thing where he starts staging the bodies. He'll take pictures of them, and that's he'll do so in a very degrading way. And he has one scene where he's just carrying dead bodies across apartment, just dragging them down the hallways of apartments and stuff. And he says sometimes the best way to hide is to not hide at all, and that's accurate because if he had been furtive about it, people would have seen them. But they see some idiot dragging some woman, they probably are just going to assume she's drunk. Like he's making no effort to hide it. That's kind of a running thing in the movie is that he's so ridiculously lucky through a lot of this movie until he very suddenly isn't. It's the kind of the thing with a lucky streak is that you're lucky until you aren't, and then you can become very unlucky because a lucky streak is just a statistical anomaly. It's just things went your way a bunch of times, but that's why some people get very nervous when they hit a streak of good luck because they're like, yeah, because I'm gonna have a really bad luck next week, which is what happens to Jack at the end of the movie. Yeah, so his next incident, and then his third incident, he says his little family got too big. So I got a friend of mine to watch this, and he assumed he meant this was Jack's literal family, that this was his wife and his two children that he takes out to this shooting range. And Jack's wearing a red hat, which I can only assume is supposed to be a reference to the Donald Trump MAGA hat, just considering he's flat out said that this movie is essentially his response to the Donald Trump presidency. So I don't think that red hat was an accident. I'm just saying. Yeah, so I don't think this was his family anyway. It was where I was going with that. When I saw this, it looked to me like that was a single mom that he had started dating. And the reason I say that is because he doesn't seem to know these kids very well, and the kids don't seem comfortable around him at all. So whether you think that was his family or not, he fucking kills all of them, and it's a downright grotesque scene. Like if you have a problem with child murder, don't watch this movie. Like these kids are brutalized. Like their actual death isn't all that intense, but he mutilates their corpses afterward, and he makes the mom watch. And the actress playing the mom, who was was she Swedish or Danish? I looked her up. Sofia Grabol, I believe was her name. I wasn't familiar with a single movie she'd made, but her performance is really good. She plays it just as being in deep shock afterward, and that's very realistic. Like he even tells her, okay, what's your favorite number? She's like, I think she says 12. He's like, 12. That's a good number. Go. He gives her to the count of 12, and she's not even trying to run away. She just kind of like wanders off in shock, and he shoots her when he gets to the count of 12. And it's interesting because one of the things Lars von Trier said about this movie was that he was curious about perspective and audience alignment, referencing Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock said that he had come to the conclusion at one point that you shouldn't bother putting the villain in jeopardy because the audience isn't aligned with them. But then, of course, Hitchcock broke that rule many times later. So Hitchcock, and that's kind of what Lars von Trier was doing, was that he's tricking you into aligning with the villain, and that's what the first two incidents really are about. Is with Uma Thurman's character, you wanted to kill her. Like this woman's a bitch. She's mean. She's snippy. She's bossy. It's like just kill her. Get her out of the movie. I don't want to watch this character for anymore. And then the second woman is just this kind of nothing character. He doesn't even really have any personality, so you don't care that he kills her. And by the time he's going after a mother and her two children, you're already in it, and you're either with this movie or you're not. And I think that was a very smart way to structure this. As far as movies that are about serial killers, a lot of typically you either try to get the audience in line with them by making them understand them, or you have a character that's worse than them. Like Hannibal is a great example of that with the movie Hannibal, where Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter is a serial killer, but Gary Oldman's Mason Verger is a deformed child molesting psycho. So you kind of like Hannibal more just because at least he's not Mason Verger. And Hannibal's charming and Mason Verger's a creep. And but this movie is it just you spend so much time with Jack, and Jack actually comes across like a pretty normal and interesting guy, even though he has this one great sequence where he's practicing facial expressions in the mirror because he acknowledges that he's a psychopath. He says that I know I am. I know I don't have normal emotional responses, so that's something I work on. And he's like, he has pictures all around his mirror, and he's like, this is happiness, this is disappointment, this is yeah, this is fear. And again, Matt Dillon is nailing it. Matt Dillon is such an underappreciated actor. I'm a huge fan of that guy. Like going back to Rumblefish, the Coppola film, or The Outsiders, which was more popular, even though I didn't particularly like The Outsiders, up through stuff in the '90s like Drugstore Cowboy or Wild Things, To Die For. And then in the 2000s, where he had he finally got his Oscar nomination with Crash. And he was in Factotum. He was on the show Wayward Pines for a minute, and I didn't. That show fizzled out fast, but he's an underappreciated actor, and this is one of his best roles, one of his best performances. Another movie you should see if you're a fan of his is Albino Alligator. That's a great movie. It's a great performance of his. He's in it with Viggo Mortensen and Gary Sinise. It's a really good movie. But yeah, this is a great role. It gives him a lot of room, and that's the thing is that because he has such a square-jawed New York tough guy vibe to him, I think that's limited the kind of roles he can get. He usually ends up playing either tough guys or idiots. Those are like he's either there's something about Mary or he's Crash. He's either an idiot or he's just kind of a bad motherfucker. But this role gives him a lot of complexity, and it shows his range. Like there's this one great sequence where he's just standing there with cards, like in that old Bob Dylan music video, and each one has a different character trait written on it, like narcissism, sadism, psychopathy, arrogance. And Jack is a very arrogant guy. He is absolutely convinced he's an artist, and he's obsessed with art. He's obsessed with architecture specifically, and he's always babbling on about that to Verge. Because again, keep in mind, this is all him narrating his life story to Verge, this guy he's talking to. And Verge is clearly kind of disgusted by him, but also fascinated by him. And I feel like Verge is kind of supposed to be the audience surrogate in the way that with these psychopaths, with mass shooters, terrorists, all these things, we know what they did was wrong and we're horrified by it, but we're still fascinated by why they did it. And that's sort of what Verge's relationship is with Jack, and by extension, what our relationship is with Jack. We know Jack's a monster. We would never want to meet Jack. We wouldn't want to talk to Jack. We would hope Jack would be locked away forever, or if you believe in the death penalty, just flat out executed. But it's still curious. You're like, why did he do that? Well, how did he get here? And this movie makes it clear that there was never really a line for him to cross. It just was a matter of starting to do it, and then it became like second nature to him. And he claims to have killed, by the fourth incident, 60 people, which would put him pretty high up there as far as serial killers go. But yeah, he's talking to this girl he's dating, played by Riley Keough. Now, Riley Keough recently had a horror hit with the movie The Lodge. And she was one of the redheaded bride in Mad Max Fury Road. She was in that movie, the Kent State sex scandal movie, Paterno with Al Pacino. She's a good actress, and I like her. She's not in this movie a lot, but I like her a lot. And she's a very fearless actress. I think she's a great actress, and I hope that, yeah, after seeing The Lodge and seeing how well she can carry a movie, because that movie is like 100% her. I hope that she has a great career ahead of her. I looked up her IMDb, and I didn't see anything I was really necessarily excited about, but I definitely want to watch anything else she's in. So anyway, he says that he cares more about her than a psychopath probably should be able to care about people. And you see this date they're having basically, where he's awful to her. Like, he is massively misogynistic towards her. He calls her simple, and he keeps it simple. She's stupid, and she's very emotionally fragile, and he's constantly condescending to her and mocking her and belittling her. And she finally kind of snaps and is apparently becoming more and more convinced that he's this notorious serial killer, which he is, that they call Mr. Sophistication, which is obviously a mocking title given to him because he's so self-possessed and so arrogant and so self-important. and the papers call him Mr. Sophistication, and he's got so anyway. She goes downstairs and tries to get one of the this cop to arrest him, and the cop just assumes they're both drunk. And there's this great moment where she says, "He says he killed 60 people. I think he might be Mr. Sophistication." And Matt Dillon burst out of the building and goes, "Everything that woman has just said is 100% complete truth." And I saw this in theaters, and that line got a good laugh. That's a really funny line, because you assume he's going to say, "No, she's a lying bitch." And he goes, "No, no, she's telling the truth. I'm a terrible person. I'm probably going to hurt her. You should do something." And the cop doesn't. And yeah, actually, and it is interesting seeing Jack, in this moment of doubt and remorse. But then his true nature kind of shines through, and he terribly mutilates her. So we get to the last incident, and Virgil at this point calls him out and says, like, "Why are all your, do you only kill women? Why are all your stories essentially about killing women?" And he did torture simple Riley Keough's characters. So Virgil is like, "Are you trying to show that you're stronger than them? Like, why do you hate women?" And he said, I killed men too." And he goes in this thing where he had abducted a group of men and tied them all up in his freezer, and he was going to try and recreate a Nazi execution tactic where you would line up prisoners in a row so that you could shoot a single bullet through all of them and kill 5 people with one bullet. And it turns into this almost comedy of errors where he's gotten the wrong kind of ammunition, so he goes back to his gun shop, which is run by Jeremy Davies, in the most random cameo I've ever seen. Jeremy Davies from, he was the nervous guy in Ravenous. He was the nervous guy in Saving Private Ryan. He was on an episode of the TV show Hannibal. He's a very odd actor. I honestly think that he may have had a brain injury at some point in his life. I've never seen him play a normal character, and he just is, or maybe he has some form of autism. Actually looked up his bio before I recorded this, because he legitimately does seem like he's on the spectrum or something. He seems to struggle with looking people in the eye. He's always mumbling. He's a very strange actor. He's one of the strangest, to be perfectly honest, but he's also a good actor. I mean, anyway, he has this completely random cameo in the movie as guy who runs gun shop. It's not a meaningful role. It's only in a couple of minutes of the movie. Fine, whatever. And then Jack finds out that he's actually wanted for theft. Not for killing 61 people, at least at this point. He's wanted for theft. And this is where his good luck streak ends and his bad luck streak begins, because he's wanted for a crime he didn't even commit. His friends all turn against him because they think he's a thief. He crashes his car. The cops end up after him. He can't get this stupid idea he has that he's going to execute all 5 of these guys with one shot. Man, at this point, the freezer is just jammed full of corpses, which was apparently inspired by the Iceman. They even made a movie about that guy, the notorious mob assassin who would freeze his victims after. They made a movie about him with Michael Shannon, Chris Evans, Winona Ryder. It's a good movie. But, and it's also kind of a wink at the camera that Jack has killed so many women on camera, but these 5 guys are completely saved by the cops. Like, Jack doesn't ever get around to killing them. So Jack finally manages to, he knows the police are after him. He can't get his little gun experiment to work, and he ends up busting open a door in the freezer that he had never been able to open before. And in there sits Virgil, just waiting for him. So, the first time I saw this, I assumed Jack had killed himself. So, but this time watching it, I noticed that the cops actually do fire into the room Jack is in, and given how narcissistic Jack is, I think Jack would have been one of those killers, kind of like Charles Manson, who would have wanted to be on camera, who would have loved to be interviewed and talked about his crimes and have a court case that drug on for years and dick with the cops and confess to stuff he didn't do, like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, the real guy did, and just stay in the limelight as long as possible. So actually, I don't think he killed himself. I think the cops killed him. But one way or the other, he died, and the movie turns into an adaptation of Dante's The Inferno. So, and Virgil, I've never actually read The Inferno, but apparently Virgil, who was a classical Roman poet, he wrote the Aeneid? I may not be pronouncing that right. I didn't study classical literature in college. But Virgil was a classic Roman poet. Now you may be thinking, why did a German actor play a Roman poet? I don't know. Why does every movie that takes place in classical Rome feature British actors? Shouldn't they be Italian? Whatever. But Bruno Ganz is good in this movie. And But I will say that Jack and Virgil's little discussions that go on throughout the whole movie. Most of them go on too long. Most of them are kind of talking. Most of them should have been cut in half. Like Jack's whole discussion where he shows this animated diagram showing his the pleasure he takes in killing versus the need he has to kill. That thing goes on forever. And then there's the whole thing about the death camps in Germany, and you actually do see Holocaust footage, by the way, if you're sensitive to that. There is some Holocaust footage in this movie, so you do see actual dead bodies, like in Abel Ferrar's The Addiction, which I know people got mad at that movie for. So, I mean, this is a Lars von Trier movie. Sensitive viewers need not apply, just flat out. Like an Antichrist, sensitive viewers shouldn't watch his movies. Period. So we learned that Jack is being led through hell, and he's kind of explaining his life story to Virgil as he goes. And it's not quite a question of justification so much as liking the attention. And again, another thing is that this goes on too long and it has some things that don't work. Like the bit where Virgil and Jack are crossing the River of Styx. It's a cool visual, but then Jack and Virgil going through the damn cave, that didn't really need to be in there. Jack and Virgil and those stupid bubbles, that part was just dumb. That really should have been cut. That's not a good visual effect. It doesn't fit in this movie's. It's just not a good scene. But I do like the ending where Jack decides he's gonna try and I love the scene where Jack sees the Elysian Fields, the kind of which are clearly kind of a reference to the tranquility of his childhood and the idea that he could have had a normal life, and he kind of realizes that he's done this to himself, and he starts crying, and that was a great moment. That's some great acting by Matt Dillon, where Jack, who has sworn he has not an ounce of remorse in him, and ultimately he can only cry for himself. He only cries for what he's done to himself, not his victims. So then Jack tries to sneak into heaven and falls into the deepest pit of hell. Whoops. And then it starts blaring that song, "Hit the Road, Jack." And that was kind of funny. So the house that Jack built opened at the Cannes Film Festival, which Lars von Trier had been banned from previously because during an exasperated moment during a panel, he had said, "Well, I guess I'm a Nazi then," which that shit was so childish and so stupid. Like, it was the equivalent of someone calling you an idiot for 5 minutes, and you're fine. I guess I'm just stupid. Whatever, leave me alone. He obviously wasn't saying, I am a Nazi. Like, no, he was, and people took that so out of context and ran with it. Even Nicholas Winding Refn, the dude who directed Drive and Only God Forgives and all that, didn't defend him. He said it was a horrifying thing to say. It's like, you guys are morons. You guys are children. Shut up. This was and that was actually one of the earliest examples of cancel culture. That happened, I believe, when he was promoting Antichrist, because people were giving him crap about that movie. But anyway, so this was out of competition at the Cannes Film Festival, and then it had a brief theatrical run in America in its unrated cut, and I got to see it. That was cool. It was a packed house. So yeah, and Uma Thurman actually ended up distancing herself from the movie because she was trying to kind of jump on the Me Too bandwagon. She apparently had some sort of grudge against Quentin Tarantino because he got her to drive a car that she felt was unsafe, and she wrecked it and hurt herself and claimed, "Me too, I crashed a car, and that's Tarantino's fault." Shut up. But she kind of distanced herself from the movie, which is fine because it's just a cameo anyway. But yeah, this is a really good movie. The title, so there's a nursery rhyme, which I didn't even know this, The House That Jack Built. And Lars von Trier had referenced that nursery rhyme in his first feature film, I think. And I read that nursery rhyme, and I cannot see a single thing it has to do with this movie. No, I think the title actually references the Metallica song, The House That Jack Built. Look up the lyrics to that song and tell me that song would have been perfect in this movie, and I actually think that most likely the only reason that song's not in this movie, because we know Lars von Trier likes heavy metal. He's used it in his other soundtracks. He used it in the Nymphomaniac soundtrack. So I think the only reason that song's not in this movie is because they couldn't afford the license, because I'm sure Metallica music isn't cheap to license. And I'm a little surprised they were. I mean, David Bowie's stuff is pretty old at this point, so getting Fame might not have cost quite as much. And they played David Bowie's Fame several times throughout the movie. But yeah, so that's what I think the title is because like I said, I could not draw any comparison between the nursery rhyme and this movie. So again, oh, and there's even an Easter egg for Antichrist in this movie. When they're going through hell, they see the cabin from Antichrist briefly. So does that suggest that that whole movie took place in? Nah. I think that's Charlotte Gainsbourg's character's own personal hell that she died. She died at the end of the movie. She went to hell, and she's trapped in this horrifying. That the location she found the most frightening. She even says that in the movie that the cabin is where she's most scared. So I think that was actually supposed to be Charlotte Gainsbourg's personal hell. But yeah, I like The House of Jack Bill. I think it's a great movie. I think it's a cool, unique movie that could have been a little bit shorter and would have been better if it had been, but I still like it, and I think that it's a good watch. So, I got a couple little newer movies for a change. I usually only talk about old movies because it's rare that I see new movies that I like enough to talk about. But I'm going to do something on the Wrong Turn franchise since we got a new Wrong Turn movie coming out soon, which I am going to see, and I'll post a video on that. I got something I want to do on that new thing, Psycho Gorman, and a low budget horror flick with Martin Cove on it. So anyway, regular updates will be next Wednesday and Friday, and I'll probably throw up a few little things between now and then. See ya.